right. So, the Theodore Roosevelt site in Theodore Roosevelt Inaugural site in Buffalo, New York, is delighted that we've been able to continue our monthly speaker night series during the pandemic, thanks to the magic of Zoom. Speaker night is our opportunity on the fourth Tuesday of most months to invite experts to help us think about some of the issues that were important during TR's presidency and continue to be relevant today, and the presidency in general, as we'll see from tonight's talk. We couldn't do this without the generous support of our series sponsors, Erie County and the New York State Council on the Arts, NYSCA. In case you're new to our speaker series, I should also mention that NYSCA's support has enabled us to record nearly all of our speakers for the past 4 years. So if you've missed any of them, I would encourage you to check out the recordings on our YouTube channel. And I'm going to ask Travis. Travis beat me to it. He already sent out the link in our chat box. Thank you, Travis. Yeah, so, in these kind of slow days where you're stuck at home, if you want to check out our catalog of other speaker night presentations, it'll keep you busy for a few hours. As I mentioned earlier, this evening's presentation is co-sponsored by the Buffalo Presidential Center. We are thrilled to be working with them once again, and particularly in bringing you this timely inaugural themed presentation. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Linda from the Buffalo Presidential Center, who will introduce tonight's speaker. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Lenora. Where else would an award-winning weather consultant call home but Western New York? While our crazy weather might make some of us feel like we could be weather experts at one time or another, Jack Kanack is on a whole other level. He's made an understanding of the weather and helping the rest of us navigate Mother Nature his life's work. After graduating from Buffalo State with a degree in geoscience, Jack continued to take a variety of advanced courses in meteorology, climatology, and global warming. He's a daily weather observer for the National Weather Service and has received their John Campius Home Award for Outstanding Service. The Department of Geography and Planning at Buff State has honored him with their Friend Award for his work with their students. Jack is also the founder and president of WeatherMedic, a North Tonawanda-based consulting business that specialized in customized weather analysis services for businesses like film production, agriculture, construction contractors, and others, as well as individuals planning weddings, honeymoons, and other weather-sensitive special events. Tonight, Jack is going to be telling us about weather and presidential inaugurations. I don't know about you, but this year I watched all-day coverage of the inaugural events on television from the comfort of my couch in my nice warm house. But in 2009, as a professor at SUNY Fredonia, I accompanied 12 students to Washington, D.C. to attend Barack Obama's first inauguration, and it was cold. The below freezing temperatures didn't dampen our excitement, but it sure made us wish that Inauguration Day was in June instead of January. So tonight, still from the comfort of my warm house, I'm so pleased on behalf of the Buffalo Presidential Center and the TR Inaugural Site to turn the program over to Jack Kanack to tell us all about inaugural weather and the presidents.
Thank you very much, Linda. I'm Jack Kanack. I'm also known as the weather medic, the doctor of weather. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about weather for each presidential inauguration since George Washington, and ending with Joe Biden, along with weather and some fun facts along the way. So let me start here. First one is to tell you about traditional inaugurations. These were all indoors, and they covered the period from 1789 through 1813. Now, the weather records were unofficial during this time period, so everything was kind of estimated. What you're looking at here is George Washington in 1789, the first inauguration of George Washington. It's a sub-treasury on Wall Street, and a statue of Washington marks the spot where he was inaugurated president in 1789 in New York City. Now, this happened in Federal Hall on April 30th, 231 years ago. So they did it April 30th. The weather for that day was estimated clear and cool with a temperature of 59. Let me go and advance this here. Let's see. Let me see if I could. I don't know why it's not advancing. Hold on, let me just stop this and get back to my computer here and escape out of it and find out why my PowerPoint's not advancing. We'll try it again. We'll go to slide 2 and we'll screen share. And thanks for your patience here. Okay, let me see. Okay, it's advancing. I don't know why that happened, but let me go back here to Zoom. And, oh, there we are. Screen share. All right, now I'm gonna go from beginning, from current slide. And there we go. So now it's sharing. Okay. In 1793, the second inauguration of George Washington, which occurred on March 4th, that's 227 years ago. It happened in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at Congress Hall. William Cushing, the Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, administered the oath. We had hazy sunshine and mild. The estimated noon temperature was 61 degrees Fahrenheit. This was the warmest March 4th inauguration with an unofficial temperature. Then in 1797, this is John Adams. He was the second president of the United States. Once again, it was held in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Congress Hall. And that was 223 years ago. Oliver Ellsworth, Chief Justice of the United States. He was the first Chief Justice to administer the oath. Skies were fair. The estimated noon temperature was 53 degrees Fahrenheit. Then we go to Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thomas Jefferson and John Quincy Adams are obsessed with the weather. They're actually weather weenies like I am. Thomas Jefferson spent 3 pounds and change to buy his first thermometer. They note the weather twice a day, and they're really interested in the weather and how the world worked. In fact, in 1959, the National Weather Service gave an award to honor cooperative weather observers for unusual and outstanding achievements in the field of meteorological observations. It is the highest award that the National Weather Service presents to volunteer observers. The award's named for Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States. The Jefferson, the statesman scientist, made an almost unbroken series of weather observations from 1776 to 1816. And I am one of the recipients of that award to go along with the John Campanius Home Award. After I got that award, I got the Jefferson Award 6 years later. So it's like the Hall of Fame of weather observers. Thomas Jefferson, he was first inaugurated as the third president of the United States on March 4th, 1801, 219 years ago. Now it went to the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. John Marshall, Chief Justice of the United States, administered the oath. It was beautiful and mild with an estimated temperature of 55 degrees. And this, of course, was the first inauguration in Washington, D.C. Jefferson broke precedent by walking to and from his swearing-in ceremony rather than riding in a carriage as his predecessors did. The Marine Band played at the inauguration for the first time. It's played at every inauguration since. And for the first time, a newspaper, the National Intelligencer, presented the inaugural address, printed that is, the inaugural address the morning of the inauguration. It also became the custom of writing to Congress to accept the inauguration and arrange the time for the ceremonies. Now we get to 1805, and it's another picture. Thomas Jefferson inaugurated March 4th, 215 years ago. The location, once again, at the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. The inauguration was held in the chamber of the U.S. House of Representatives. John Marshall, once again, Chief Justice of the United States, administered the oath. All they could talk about during that day was they believed it was fair, meaning good, an estimated noon temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The weather observation was taken by Jefferson himself, being the weather weenie he was. In 1809, you have the first inauguration of James Madison on March 4th, 211 years ago, as fourth president of the United States. Once again, John Marshall, the Chief Justice of the United States, administered the oath. It was cloudy and it rained the day before, leaving the streets muddy. That's all they could talk about. And then in 1813, John Madison gave the second inauguration. It was 207 years ago on March 4th. At the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., John Marshall was still around as Chief Justice of the United States, administering the oath. All they could say about that day was sunny. Then in 1817, James Monroe was inaugurated, the fifth president of the United States, on Tuesday, March 4th, 1817, in front of the old brick Capitol where the Supreme Court building now stands in Washington, D.C. The inauguration marked the commencement of the first four-year term of James Monroe as president. Once again, John Marshall administered the oath of office. It was 50 degrees, warm and sunny. This was the first outdoor inauguration, and the noon temperature is estimated. Now, in 1821, James Monroe was inaugurated, the second inauguration, held on Monday, March 5th, 1821, 199 years ago, in the House chamber of the U.S. Capitol. The inauguration marked the commencement of his second term as president. He was sworn in by, once again, John Marshall, the Chief Justice of the United States. Any inauguration on March 4th, due to the Christian Sabbath, was always moved to the 5th. So they would never do it on a Sunday. Now, during this inauguration, it was 28 degrees Fahrenheit during the ceremony on March 5th. The observation was taken by John Quincy Adams, who became the sixth president of the United States. Snow began on Saturday evening, making Washington snowbound by Sunday afternoon. Snow continued through the inauguration day, forcing Monroe to take his oath of office in the House chambers. And then, like I said, John Quincy Adams, sixth president of the United States, he was inaugurated at the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. John Marshall still around, giving the Chief Justice of the United States, administering the oath. 47 degrees Fahrenheit and rain. The total rainfall was 0.79 inches, and the observation was taken by Adams himself. Now, let me tell you what 0.79 inches is. That's 79 hundredths of an inch. And to get 1/100th of an inch is the time where your streets are dry and they become wet. So every time your streets would get wet, it would be a 1/100th of an inch. If you're standing waiting for a bus, if you get your clothes wet, that's 100th of an inch. So this one had 79 of those. So it was a very wet day. And another thing about Adams was he was the first president to have been the son of a former president, John Adams. Now, John Quincy Adams was elected president by the United States House of Representatives after none of the four candidates secured a majority of votes in the Electoral College in the 1824 presidential election as prescribed by the 12th Amendment. The outcome was assured when Henry Clay, one of the frontrunners, threw his support to Mr. Adams so that Andrew Jackson's candidacy would fail. Jackson had polled more popular votes in the election, but he did not gain enough electoral votes to win outright. Adams ran for re-election in 1828, but he lost to Jackson. Now, it's interesting that this thing with the Electoral College was going on back in those days as well. So in 1829, Andrew Jackson became the 7th president of the United States, and the location was March 4th, 1829, at the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., and it was the first time in which the ceremony was held on the east portico of the United States Capitol. John Marshall still was given the oath, the Chief Justice of the United States. It was 57 degrees, warm and balmy. The noon temperature is estimated. Then in 1833, we had Andrew Jackson with his fourth, it was March 4th was his second inauguration. 187 years ago, at the House Chamber of the United States Capitol, Washington, D.C., John Marshall, believe it or not, still around, Chief Justice of the United States, administering the oath. Now, what happened is that the weather for that day, they said here was 29 degrees Fahrenheit and uncertain, but probably fair weather based on descriptions of happy crowds, which is also important. The noon temperature, of course, is estimated. I thought it was funny that all I could find was that the crowds were happy. In 1837, Martin Van Buren was inaugurated as the 8th president of the United States. It took place on Saturday, March 4th, 183 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. It was the 13th inauguration and marked the commencement of the only 4-year term of Martin Van Buren as president. We have a different Chief Justice of the United States now. Roger B. Taney administered the oath. It was 26, sunny and brisk. The noon temperature is estimated. Interesting about Martin Van Buren, he was the first U.S. president not born a British subject. Now, Van Buren will also become the last sitting vice president to be inaugurated as president through an election until George H.W. Bush in 1989. In 1841, we had the inauguration of William Henry Harrison as the 9th president of the United States on March 4th, 1841, 179 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the 14th inauguration and marked the commencement of the only 4-year term of William Henry Harrison as president and John Tyler as vice president. The presidential oath of office was administered by Harrison by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney. Harrison died 31 days into his term, and this was the first U.S. president to die in office and has the shortest presidential term in American history. A damp and gray day in Washington, D.C. Was at the inaugural parade for William Harrison on March 4th. He died a month later from pneumonia. Now, they say it was 48 degrees Fahrenheit, overcast with a cold, blustery wind. The noon temperature was estimated, but one of the things was his speech lasted 1 hour and 40 minutes, and he rode a horse to and from the Capitol without a hat or an overcoat. Pneumonia developed from a lingering cold he caught on that day, and he just died 1 month later on April 4th, 1841. Tyler then succeeded him to the presidency, created precedents which would be followed 7 more times before it was officially regulated through the 25th Amendment in 1967. So we have President John Taylor, and I got some slides for William Henry Harrison too. I gave him a couple slides because I figured he had the shortest term. John Tyler in 1841 was inaugurated on April 6th, 1841. 179 years ago, was the 10th president of the United States, and the location was Brown's Indian Queen Hotel in Washington, D.C. William Cranch, Chief Justice of the United States Circuit Court of the District of Columbia, administered the oath. It was 50 degrees Fahrenheit with clear skies. The noon temperature is estimated, and of course, this was the first non-scheduled inauguration to ever take place in American history. In 1845, we had James Polk, and he was inaugurated on March 4th, 175 years ago, as the 11th president of the United States. At the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., Roger Taney, Chief Justice of the United States, administered the oath. Now, the oath summary view here, you have of a crowd with umbrellas in front of a platform on the east portico of the U.S. Capitol, where Chief Justice Roger B. Taney administered that oath to James Polk under an umbrella in heavy rain. It was 42 degrees Fahrenheit, thunderstorms at dawn with rain during the day. The total rainfall was 0.40 inches, 4/10 of an inch, so the streets got wet 40 times. Polk took his oath of office under an umbrella in heavy rain. The crowd was a sea of umbrellas with people standing ankle deep in mud. In 1849, we had Zachary Taylor. He was the 12th president of the United States, and that was on Monday, March 5th, 1849, 171 years ago, at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., and was the second instance of inauguration being rescheduled due to a March 4th falling on a Sunday, the Christian Sabbath. This was the 16th inauguration and marked the commencement of the only 4-year term of both Zachary Taylor as president and Millard Fillmore was his vice president. Taylor died 1 year, 126 days into his term, and Fillmore succeeded him to the presidency. The presidential oath of office was administered by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney. Inauguration day started off being cloudy with snow flurries, 42 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy with snow flurries during the inauguration, but turned into heavy snow during the inaugural balls. The ceremony was on March 5th. Then in 1850, notice the pictures are getting better. On July 10th, we had President Millard Fillmore, who was inaugurated the 13th president of the United States on July 10th, 1850, 170 years ago, at the House Chamber inside the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. Following the death of Zachary Taylor the previous day, this inauguration, the second non-scheduled inauguration to ever take place, marked the commencement of the only term of Millard Fillmore, a partial term of 2 years, 273 days as president. During the inauguration, William Cranch, Chief Justice of the U.S. Circuit Court of the D.C., administered the presidential oath of office to Fillmore. Cranch had also administered the oath to John Tyler in 1841 when Tyler succeeded the presidency upon William Henry Harrison's death. Fillmore was the last president from neither the Democrat or Republican parties. All the rest have been since then. 87 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy skies. The ceremony was indoors. The noon temperature is estimated. Then in 1853, we had the inauguration on March 4th of Franklin Pierce as the 14th president of the United States. That was 167 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., and was the 17th inauguration and marked the commencement of the only four-year term of Franklin Pierce as president. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney administered the presidential oath of office. Pierce affirmed the oath of office rather than swear it, and was also the first president to recite his inaugural address from memory. President Franklin Pierce was sworn into office on another cold, windy, and snowy day. He awoke to heavy snow in the morning, which continued to about 11:30 a.m. Skies looked to be brightening by noon. Shortly after Pierce took his oath of office, as he began his inaugural address, snow started again. It came down heavier than ever, dispersing much of the crowd and ruining plans for the parade. Abigail Fillmore, first lady to the outgoing president's Millard Fillmore, caught a cold as she sat on the cold, wet, exposed platform during the swearing-in ceremony. The cold developed into pneumonia, and she died at the end of the month. It was 35 degrees Fahrenheit, and the temperature was estimated. It's too bad they didn't have Millard Fillmore Hospital at the time when she got the pneumonia there. So in 1857, James Buchanan was the 15th president of the United States, and that was held on Wednesday, March 4th, 163 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the 18th inauguration and marked the commencement of the only four-year term of both James Buchanan as president and Chief Justice Robert B. Taney administered the oath of office. This was the first inaugurated ceremony known to be photographed. So that's an actual photograph there. It was 49 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. We get down to 1861, and you have the first inauguration of President Lincoln, the 16th president of the United States, at the U.S. Capitol here is under construction on March 4th, 1861, 159 years ago. Roger B. Taney, Chief Justice of the United States, administered the oath. We had rain until mid-morning and then sunny and mild in the afternoon. It's kind of interesting to see that Capitol there being constructed. And then in 1865, the second inauguration of Abraham Lincoln as president of the United States took place Saturday, March 4th, 155 years ago, at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the 20th inauguration and marked the commencement of the second and final term of Abraham Lincoln as president and only term of Andrew Johnson as vice president. Lincoln, of course, was assassinated 42 days into his term, and Johnson succeeded him to the presidency. Chief Justice Salmon P. Chase administered the presidential oath of office. This was the first inauguration to feature African Americans in the inaugural parade and was the first inauguration to be extensively photographed. It was 45 degrees Fahrenheit, rained for 2 days, and right up to the ceremony, when the rain ended and the sun broke through. The rainfall total for the day was 0.3 of an inch, so it got the streets wet 30 times. The bulk of it falling near daybreak. Grounds around the Capitol were very soft and muddy. We get down to the April 15th, 1865, inauguration of Andrew Johnson as the 17th president of the United States 155 years ago at Kirkwood House in Washington, D.C., following the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. The inauguration marked the commencement of Andrew Johnson's only term, a partial term of 3 years, 323 days as president. Chief Justice Salmon P. Chase administered the oath of office, and this was the third non-scheduled inauguration to take place. 57 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a rainy day. 35 hundredths of an inch of rain fell. So you get it 35 times the street got wet. Then we moved down to 1869, Ulysses S. Grant. You see a picture here of Ulysses S. Grant delivering his first inaugural address on the East Portico of the U.S. Capitol. That, of course, was March 20th, 1869, 151 years ago, as the 18th President of the United States, Salmon P. Chase, administered the oath of office. It was 40 degrees Fahrenheit, light rain fell all morning, but stopped just before noon. The afternoon was mostly sunny. The total rain was 11 hundredths of an inch, so 11 hundredths times 11 times the streets got wet. Then in 1871, we had official weather records began. The records here in Buffalo in 1870, the precursor to the National Weather Service was started in Buffalo by Albert Meyer. He went in, he created, used the Army Signal Corps to start weather observations in Buffalo, and then the Weather Service started from that. But so now we have official temperatures for all inaugurations from 1873 through 1933. And what we have here for those inaugurations, the average high temperature was 37 degrees Fahrenheit. The average low temperature, well, the average high was 43.5. The average low was 30.6 degrees Fahrenheit. If you add them up and divide by 2, you get an average temperature of 37 degrees Fahrenheit. The coldest low was 4 degrees Fahrenheit in 1873. The coldest high temperature was 20 degrees Fahrenheit in 1873. And the warmest high for that period was 58 degrees Fahrenheit, set both in 1885 and 1913, where we didn't have inaugurations. But what's interesting, well, not on all the dates, but what's interesting is I took those were the dates, right? Warmest high 58. Precipitation, 86 hundredths of an inch in 1889 was the wettest. So the streets got wet 86 times. The snowiest, 9.8 inches in 1909. Of course, at Buffalo, it would be just, snow flurries. Maybe they cancel yoga classes with 9.8 inches of snow. But in Washington, D.C., they see a flake and they close everything down. So what we have here is Ulysses S. Grant, the second inauguration. It's an illustration of former Union General Ulysses S. Grant braving the bitter cold as he takes the oath of office on March 4th, 1873, 147 years ago, at the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. Salmon P. Chase, Chief Justice of the United States, administered the oath. And of course, from what I said up earlier, it was the coldest March date at that swearing-in ceremony with a low temperature of 4 degrees, a record for the month of March to this date. And we had out of all types of records, normal temperature high and low for Washington, D.C. on March 4th is a high of 52 and a low of 34. Now they were a high of 20 and a low of 4. And these records still are holding to this date. During the day, bitterly cold winds gusted to 40 miles an hour. By noon, the temperature rose to a balmy 16 degrees. Of course, in Buffalo, that would be shorts weather for everybody. And it was clear, windy, and bitterly cold with high temperatures only reaching 20, and the wind chill temperatures were negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, what's interesting with this one was cadets and midshipmen had been standing on the mall for more than an hour and a half without overcoats. Several of them collapsed. When the president delivered his inaugural address, the wind made his words inaudible to even those on the platform with him. face probably froze. The inaugural ball was held in a temporary building without heat. Some say that it ended early when the food froze. It was halted at midnight so people who had been dancing in their overcoats and heavy wraps could go home and get warm. So this one was the absolute coldest inauguration. In 1877, Rutherford B. Hayes, it's a setting of the inauguration here. You're seeing a picture of it on this, showing the Senate wing of the U.S. Capitol and the crowd on the front lawn on March 5th. I have to say that the photograph was from the architect of the Capitol. I have to say that to make it legal in order to use the photograph. So I had to say that. The inauguration of Rutherford B. Hayes as the 19th president of the United States took place 143 years ago. The East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. It was the 23rd inauguration and marked the commencement of the only four-year term of Rutherford B. Hayes as president and William H. Wheeler as vice president. And of course, as March 4th, 1877 fell on a Sunday, Hayes was sworn in on the Red Room of the White House on March 3rd, becoming the first president to take the presidential oath of office in the White House. The ceremony was held in secret under tight security, as the previous year's election had been so bitterly divisive to the point that outgoing President Grant feared an insurrection by Samuel J. Tilden supporters, while assuring any Democratic Party attempt to hijack a public inauguration ceremony would fail. Boy, oh boy, am I glad that this stuff would never repeat again. It was 35 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy with brief periods of light snow. The ceremony, of course, was held on March 5th. So on 1881, the inauguration of James A. Garfield as 20th president of the United States was held on Friday, March 4th. 1881, 139 years ago, at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the 24th inauguration and marked the commencement of the only four-year term of James A. Garfield as president and Chester A. Arthur as vice president. Garfield died 199 days into his term, and Arthur succeeded him to the presidency. Chief Justice Morrison Waite administered the presidential oath of office. It was 33 degrees Fahrenheit. It snowed all night until about 10 a.m. The afternoon was sunny and windy. Then in 1881, Judge Brady, Justice of the New York State Department Supreme Court, administered the presidential oath to Vice President Chester Arthur at his residence in New York, September 20th, 1881. Now, I saw clippings with like three different dates. I saw 19th, 20th, 21st. The official one was supposedly September 20th, 1881, 139 years ago. It marked the commencement of Chester Arthur's only term, a partial term of 3 years, 165 days as the 21st president. This was the fourth non-scheduled inauguration to take place, the last in the 19th century, and was the first to take place in New York City since George Washington's first inauguration in 1789. The temperature was 75 degrees Fahrenheit. The weather was fair. Then we get to Grover Cleveland, and this was an inauguration of President Cleveland during his inaugural address to the crowd on the East Portico of the U.S. Capitol. That happened on Wednesday, March 4th, 135 years ago, as he was inaugurated the 22nd president of the United States. And this was the 25th inauguration and marked the commencement of the first four-year term of Grover Cleveland as president and the only term of Thomas A. Hendricks as vice president. Cleveland's second inauguration took place 8 years after the first, and his two terms in office were non-consecutive. He is the only U.S. president to serve non-consecutive terms. It was 54 degrees and sunny. The high temperature for the day was 58 degrees Fahrenheit. That tied 1913 for the warmest official recorded March 4th inauguration day temperature at the time of the inauguration. And then we have in 1889, the inauguration of Benjamin Harrison as the 23rd president of the United States took place Monday, March 4th, 1889, 131 years ago at the East portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. It was the 26th inauguration and marked the commencement of the only four-year term of Benjamin Harrison as president and Levi P. Morton as vice president. Chief Justice Melvin Fuller administered the presidential oath of office as rain poured down. His grandfather was William Henry Harrison, the president who died in 1841. Now it was 43 degrees Fahrenheit. It rained all day. The total rainfall was 86 hundredths of an inch, so 86 times the streets got wet. Harrison took his oath of office in a downpour under an umbrella. At least he had an umbrella. This made it nearly impossible for horses and carriages to move toward the event. This was the wettest officially recorded March 4th inauguration day. And then what happened in 1893, pictured above, by the way, is the flag of 1882. If you can see that flag in the center of the screen. This was the second inauguration of Grover Cleveland. Now, what's interesting here is they claimed he was another president. He was the same president, but they moved the number up to 24. But when the president has been serving consecutive terms, they leave the number the same. So I don't know why. So Cleveland got counted twice. Maybe somebody could answer that question for me at the end. The second inauguration took place on Saturday, March 4th, 1893, 127 years ago. Grover Cleveland, the 24th president of the United States, at the East portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the 27th inauguration and marked the commencement of the second and final four-year term of Grover Cleveland as president and the only term of Adlai Stevenson as vice president. Cleveland had been previously the 22nd president and was the only president to serve, once again, those two non-consecutive terms. Chief Justice Melvin Fuller administered the presidential oath of office. For those that don't know about Cleveland, he used to be the mayor of Buffalo, and he was a sheriff of Erie County back in the day. It was 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow began during the early morning and ended around 1 p.m. So it snowed during the inauguration. It was like being at home. You know, 1 to 2 inches of snow fell across the area. A biting wind blew from the northwest. The crowd was small for the ceremonies. Many planned events were canceled. And a pretty much of a fun fact, do you know what president is pictured on the $1,000 bill? It's Grover Cleveland. He has the picture of the $1,000 bill. They are no longer in circulation. If you have one on you at home, don't give it to the bank because they will confiscate it on you and give you $1,000. So just a little side note there, fun fact. 1897, we have a picture of Chief Justice Melvin Fuller administering the oath to William McKinley as the president in 1897. The outgoing president, Grover Cleveland, standing to his right. And of course, this took place on Thursday, March 4th, 1897, 123 years ago, as William McKinley was the 25th president of the United States to be inaugurated in front of the old Senate chamber at the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the 28th inauguration and marked the commencement of the first and eventually only full term of William McKinley as president and the only term of Garrett Hobart as vice president. This was the first inauguration to be recorded on film. It was 40 degrees Fahrenheit and clear. In 1901, William McKinley was, here's a president, is a summary of a crowd standing in front of the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., with William McKinley standing on the podium in the middle. And this is another official architect of the Capitol photograph. So I have to say that to make it legal. The second inauguration of William McKinley as president of the United States was held on March 4th on a Monday, 119 years ago in 1901 at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. It was the 29th inauguration and marked the commencement of the second and final four-year term of William McKinley as president and the only term of Theodore Roosevelt as vice president. McKinley died 194 days into his term, and Roosevelt succeeded him to the presidency. Melvin Fuller, Chief Justice of the United States, administered the oath. It was 47 degrees Fahrenheit, overcast. It rained overnight and then began again during the ceremony and ended at 3:45 p.m. Total rainfall was 32 hundredths of an inch. Then in 1901, here's a picture of the first inauguration of Theodore Roosevelt as the 26th president of the United States that took place Saturday, September 14th, 1901, 119 years ago at the Ansley Wilcox House at 641 Delaware Avenue in Buffalo, New York, followed the death of President William McKinley earlier in the day. The inauguration, the fifth non-scheduled inauguration to ever take place, and the first in the 20th century, marked the commencement of the first term, a partial term of 3 years, 171 days of Theodore Roosevelt as president. John R. Hazel, U.S. District Judge for the Western District of New York, administered the presidential oath of office. 72 degrees Fahrenheit, skies were clear. The noon temperature was estimated. And let me tell you, Chamber of Commerce weather, this is supposedly a president interior room of the Wilcox House where Theodore Roosevelt took his presidential oath of office. Then in 1905, you had President Roosevelt inaugurated as the 26th president of the United States. The second inauguration took place Saturday, March 4th, 1905, 115 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., and it was the 30th inauguration and marked the beginning of the second and only full term of Theodore Roosevelt as president and the only term of Charles W. Fairbanks as vice president. Chief Justice Melvin Fuller administered the presidential oath of office. It was 45 degrees, sunny, with strong northwest winds. Patches of snow remained on the ground from the light snow the day before. In 1909, William H. Taft, here's a President Taft, is a picture of him, photographed with Edward F. Stallwagon, chief of the inaugural committee, and with Vice President James S. Sherman. The inauguration of William Taft as the 27th president of the United States was held on Thursday, March 4th, 1909, 111 years ago at the Senate chamber inside the United States Capitol, Washington, D.C., instead of the regular East Portico due to a blizzard. This was the 31st inauguration and marked the commencement of William Howard Taft's only term as president and James S. Sherman's only term as vice president. Due to a blizzard the night before that covered Washington, D.C. with that 9.8 inches of snow, the inauguration was moved indoors into the Senate chamber. The presidential oath of office was administered by Chief Justice Melvin Fuller, who was doing it for a sixth and final time. Another picture, here's a picture of the presidential reviewing stand. And the third picture here I have is President William H. Taft returned to the White House after his inauguration on a snowy and windy March 4th, 1909 in Washington, D.C. The snow began and winds began the day before. Snow squalls with strong winds toppled trees and telephone poles. Trains were stalled and the city streets clogged. All activity was brought to a standstill. Sanitation workers shoveled sand and snow throughout half the night. Trains were stalled and the city streets clogged, and all activities came to a standstill. Despite the adverse weather conditions, the inaugural parade was not canceled. It took 6,000 men and 500 wagons to clear 58,000 tons of snow and slush from the parade route. Despite the freezing temperatures, howling winds, snow, and sleet, a large crowd gathered in front of the Capitol to view the inauguration, but the weather forced the ceremonies indoors. Just after the swearing in, the snow tapered off. So at swearing in time, we had 32 degrees Fahrenheit, heavy snow, drifting snow, and strong winds. The 9.8 inches of snow ended at 12:20 p.m., but the afternoon remained cloudy and windy. And of course, this is March 4th, greatest officially recorded inauguration day snowfall. Then we go to 1913 with Woodrow Wilson. There's a photograph showing the crowd and lines of cadets at the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. for the first inauguration of President Woodrow Wilson as the 28th President of the United States, held on Tuesday, March 4th, 1913, 107 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. And this was the 32nd inauguration and marked the commencement of the first four-year term of Woodrow Wilson as president and Thomas R. Marshall as vice president. Chief Justice Edward D. White administered the presidential oath of office to Wilson. It was 55 degrees Fahrenheit, overcast but mild. This is the warmest March 4th inauguration. The high temperature for the day was 58 degrees Fahrenheit, and of course that tied 1885 for the warmest official March 4th inauguration day. And then in 1917, on March 5th, was the second inauguration of President Wilson. 103 years ago, as President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, it was held privately on Sunday, March 4th, 1917, at the President's Room inside the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., and publicly, of course, on March 5th at the East Portico of the Capitol. It was the 33rd inauguration and marked the commencement of the second final four-year term of both Woodrow Wilson as vice president and Thomas R. Marshall as vice president. Chief Justice Edward D. White administered the presidential oath of office to Wilson. Crowds of men in Washington were at the inauguration, assaulted women picketing the White House and demanding women get the right to vote. Now, this press coverage of the violence of the women's suffrage movement overshadowed that of the inauguration itself. We were 38 degrees, partly cloudy and windy on that March 5th ceremony. In 1921, on March 4th, 199 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., Warren G. Harding was inaugurated president. This was the 34th inauguration and marked the commencement of Warren G. Harding's only term as president and Calvin G. Coolidge's only term as vice president. Harding died 2 years, 151 days into his term as 29th president of the United States, and Coolidge succeeded him to the presidency. It was 38 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And then on August 3rd, 1923, President Calvin Coolidge was inaugurated, the 30th president of the United States, on Friday, August 3rd. 97 years ago at the Coolidge homestead in Plymouth Notch, Vermont, following the death of President Warren G. Harding. This was the sixth non-scheduled inauguration to ever take place and marked the commencement of the first term, a partial term of 1 year, 213 days of Calvin Coolidge as president. The presidential oath of office was administered to the new president by his father, John Calvin Coolidge Sr., who was a Vermont notary public and justice of the peace, and witnessed by Mrs. Calvin Coolidge, Porter H. Dale, and Leonard L. Lane. On Tuesday, August 21st, 1923, President Coolidge repeated the oath of office before Justice Adolph A. Holing, Jr. of the Circuit Court of the District of Columbia at the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C. At the time of the ceremony, and not the ceremony, at the swearing in at the Coolidge homestead, it was 65 degrees with fair skies, and that was at 2:46 a.m. in the Green Mountains of Vermont. Now the temperature is estimated. Well, in 1925, you had the second inauguration of Calvin Coolidge in the East Portico of the United States Capitol, and it was the 35th inauguration and marked the commencement of the second and only full term as Calvin Coolidge as president and the only term of Charles G. Dawes as vice president. Chief Justice William Howard Taft, who had served as president from 1909 to 1913, administered the presidential oath of office. This was the first inauguration in which a former U.S. president administered the oath and the first to be broadcast nationally on radio. We were 44 degrees Fahrenheit, mostly sunny skies. In 1929, we had Herbert C. Hoover. And here's a shot of a bird's eye view of the Capitol grounds and inaugural grounds taken from the roof of the Capitol looking north. One could see the wet streets because during the inauguration of Herbert Hoover as the 31st president of the United States on March 4th, 1929, 91 years ago, at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., it was the 36th inauguration and marked the commencement of the only term of both Herbert Hoover, you say that twice, as president and Charles Curtis as vice president. Chief Justice and former President William Howard Taft administered the presidential oath of office to Hoover. This was the first presidential inauguration to be recorded by sound newsreels. 48 degrees Fahrenheit, a heavy rain began just before the oath of office was administered, and the Capitol grounds and parade route were so crowded that it was impossible for anyone to run for cover. By the time he completed his inaugural address, President Hoover's face was beaded with water and his suit was wringing wet. Herbert Hoover, I did that twice, inaugural parade moved up Pennsylvania Avenue during a lull in the rain. The intermittent rain continued throughout the day, and the total rainfall was 0.4 of an inch. In 1933, notice the pictures, I'm getting better here, but still no color. President Franklin D. Roosevelt on March 4th was the last ceremony to be held on a march when the 20th Amendment was ratified. All subsequent inaugurals have been held in January. And of course, this is one of those famous official architect of the Capitol photographs to make it official. The first inauguration of Franklin D. Roosevelt as the 32nd president of the United States was held on Saturday, March 4th, 1933, 87 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was a 37th inauguration, marked the commencement of the first term of Franklin Roosevelt as president and John Nance Garner as vice president. Chief Justice Charles Evan Hughes administered the presidential oath of office. It was 42 degrees Fahrenheit, mostly cloudy with a few peaks of sun. So the question now is, what is the normal weather for a January inauguration? So the previous slide I composed were just the March inaugurations when they had inauguration every 4 years. This is looking at the climatology for every year going back since like 1933. So here it is. The normal high temperature for the day averages 43. The normal low temperature for the 20th of January in Washington, D.C. is 28. The normal weather for 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is a temperature of 37 degrees Fahrenheit, partly cloudy skies, a 10-mile-per-hour wind, and a wind chill of 31 degrees Fahrenheit. There is about a 1 in 3 chance of measurable precipitation. That means at least 1/100 of an inch. So that means the streets get wet during the day, and a 1 in 6 chance of precipitation during the ceremony. There's a 1 in 10 chance of measurable snow. That's at least 1/10 of an inch of snow on the day, and a 1 in 20 chance of snow during that ceremony. So there's also a 1 in 6 chance that there will be at least 1 inch of snow already on the ground from a previous snowfall. Since 1937, when the inauguration was moved to January, there's been measurable rain or snowfall on 43% of January 20th. So there's some more climatological data for January 20th. For all dates, we had a high, guys could get as high as 70 in 1951. We were -2 degrees Fahrenheit in 1985 for Reagan. That's still a record. For January 20th is a record low. 1.77 inches in 1937. That still stands as the wettest January day for January 20th. And that is also still a record. It was an inauguration day. And our record snowfall was 3.8 inches set back in 1975. Now, most January inauguration days have been colder than these averages suggest. However, since 1937, temperatures recorded on all inaugurations show an average high of 40.8 degrees, so a little bit lower than the 43, and an average low temperature of 27.1 degrees, a little bit lower than the 28. The average temperature averages 33.9 degrees. Now, the warmer inaugurations typically favor incoming Republican presidents. The swearing-in ceremonies have averaged about 6 degrees warmer for Republican presidents than for Democratic ones. Since 1937, there have been 12 Democratic and 10 Republican inaugurations. The Republican Party also takes the average for warmest presidential inaugurations with an average temperature of 39.3 degrees. The Democrats take the coldest with an average of 33.3 degrees. So there's a whole bunch of stats for you there. In 1937, Franklin Roosevelt's second inauguration on January 20th, 1937, 84 years ago in Washington, D.C. It was a cold and rainy day, as you can see from the picture. The rain was heavy rain was reported at times. Some sleet and freezing rain was observed in the morning. Between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., 0.69 inches of rain fell. So when you think of it, 69 times the streets got wet during just those 2 hours, so heavy rain. The ceremony began at 12:23 p.m. The noon temperature was 33 degrees Fahrenheit. At the president's insistence, he rode back to the White House in an open car with half an inch of water standing on the floor. Later, he stood for an hour and a half in an exposed viewing stand watching the inaugural parade splash by in a wet deluge. Total rainfall for the day was a wet 1.77 inches. That was a real soaker. And still is the record for January 20th, as I mentioned before. In 1941 was the third inauguration of President Franklin Roosevelt on Monday, January 20th, 1941, 80 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. It was the 39th inauguration and marked the commencement of the third and eventually final full term of Franklin D. Roosevelt as president and the only term of Henry A. Wallace as vice president. This was the first and only time a president has been inaugurated for a third term after the 22nd Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified in 1951. No person can be elected president more than twice. Chief Justice Charles Hughes administered the presidential oath of office to Roosevelt. It was 29 degrees Fahrenheit, sunny, but cold with a brisk wind. The wind chill was 10. Then in 1945, we had the fourth inauguration of Franklin D. Roosevelt as president of the United States, held on a Saturday, January 20th, 76 years ago. This was the 40th inauguration and marked the commencement of the fourth and final term as Franklin D. Roosevelt as president and the only term of Henry S. Truman as vice president. This was the first and only time a president has been inaugurated for a fourth term. Roosevelt died 82 days into his term, and Truman succeeded him to the presidency. Due to austerity measures in effect during World War II, the inauguration was held on the south portico of the White House rather than the Capitol. The parade and other festivities were canceled as well. The oath of office was administered by Chief Justice Harold F. Stone. It was 33 degrees Fahrenheit. Light snow ended around 9 a.m. that morning, and we had cloudy skies. I was reading this last inauguration of Biden. They spent $100 million on this inauguration. So you think they'd have some austerity measures with COVID, but I would have a toned down ceremony, but that's not me. In 1945, April 12th was President Harry S. Truman as the 33rd President of the United States. It was held at 7 p.m. on Thursday, April 12th, 1945, 75 years ago at the Cabinet Room inside the White House in Washington, D.C. Following the death of Franklin Roosevelt earlier that day, it was the seventh non-scheduled inauguration to ever take place, and it marked the commencement of the first term, a partial term of 3 years, 283 days of Henry S. Truman as vice president. Chief Justice of the United States, Harlan F. Stone, administered the presidential oath of office. This event has the distinction of being the first inauguration to be photographed, as Theodore Roosevelt had ejected the photographers from his 1901 inauguration after they started fighting with each other, and Calvin Coolidge's 1923 inauguration was late at night. It was 2-something in the morning, with no press or no electric lights. It was 64 degrees Fahrenheit, fair skies, and the temperature there was estimated. In 1949, the second inauguration of Harry S. Truman as President of the United States was held Thursday, January 20th, 1949, 72 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. It was the 41st inauguration and marked the commencement of the second and only full term of Harry Truman as president, as well as the only term of Alvin W. Parkley as vice president. Chief Justice Fred M. Vinson administered the presidential oath of office. It was the first televised U.S. presidential inauguration and the first with an air parade. It was 38 degrees Fahrenheit, mostly sunny and windy. In 1953, we had Dwight D. Eisenhower as the first inaugurated as the 34th president of the United States. Was held Tuesday, January 20th, 1953, 68 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the 42nd inauguration and marked the commencement of the first term of Dwight D. Eisenhower as president and Richard Nixon as vice president. Chief Justice Fred M. Vinson administered the presidential oath of office to Eisenhower. It was 49 degrees Fahrenheit with cloudy skies. In 1957, you have a photograph showing singer Miriam Anderson performing at the Eisenhower inauguration as President Eisenhower and Vice President Richard Nixon stand behind her. And of course, this was the second inauguration of Dwight D. Eisenhower as President of the United States. We had a private ceremony on Sunday, January 20th, 1957 at the White House, and publicly the following day on Monday, January 21st, 1957, 64 years ago, at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the 43rd inauguration and marked the commencement of the second and final four-year term of both Dwight D. Eisenhower as president and Richard Nixon as vice president. Chief Justice Earl Warren administered the presidential oath of office. It was 44 degrees Fahrenheit. On January 21st, light snow fell in the early morning. We had cloudy skies with a few flurries in the mid-afternoon. In 1961, the 35th president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was inaugurated on Friday, January 20th, 1961, 60 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. It was the 44th inauguration and marked the commencement of the only term of both John F. Kennedy as president and Lyndon B. Johnson as vice president. Kennedy was assassinated 2 years, 306 days into his final term, and Johnson succeeded him to the presidency. Earl Warren, Chief Justice of the United States of the Supreme Court, administered the oath. Now, here's a picture of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that prepared to move hundreds of abandoned vehicles that blocked the snow-filled streets of Washington, D.C. prior to the inauguration of John F. Kennedy on January 20th, 1961. On the eve of the inauguration, that's the 19th, the day before, 8 inches of snow fell and caused the most crippling traffic jam for its time. Hundreds of cars were marooned and thousands of cars were abandoned. The Army Corps of Engineers were summoned to help with this endeavor. The president-elect had to cancel dinner plans and in a struggle to keep other commitments is reported to have only 4 hours of sleep. Former President Herbert Hoover, I did that 3 times today, was unable to fly into Washington National Airport due to the weather and had to miss the swearing-in ceremony. By sunrise, the snow had ended and the skies were clearing, but the day remained bitter cold. An army of men worked all night to clear Pennsylvania Avenue, and despite the cold, a large crowd turned out for the swearing-in ceremony and inaugural parade. At noon, the temperature was only 22 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind was blowing from the northwest, making it feel at 19 miles an hour from the northwest, making it feel like the temperature was 7 above zero. Though most of the snow fell on January 19th, the 1961 inauguration holds a record for the most snow on the ground of all the January inauguration ceremonies at 8 inches. Now, in 1963, on November 22nd, we have a picture here of Lyndon B. Johnson taking the oath of office aboard Air Force One at Love Field Airport 2 hours and 8 minutes after the assassination of John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas, November 22nd, 1963. At 2:29 p.m., 57 years ago, Jackie Kennedy Wright, still in her blood-soaked clothes, looks on. Judge Sarah T. Hughes, judge of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Texas, administered the oath. It was 68 degrees Fahrenheit and the skies were clear. In 1965 was the second president of Lyndon B. Johnson, and it was held on Wednesday, January 20th, 56 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the 45th inauguration and marked the commencement of the second and only full term of Lyndon B. Johnson as president and the only term of Hubert Humphrey as vice president. Chief Justice Earl Warren administered the oath of office. 38 degrees Fahrenheit, skies were cloudy, and 1 inch of snow was on the ground. In 1969, hey, we got a color picture of the inauguration of Richard Nixon as the 37th president of the United States on Monday, January 20th, 1969, 52 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the 46th inauguration and marked the commencement of the first and eventually only full term of both Richard Nixon as president and Spiro Agnew as vice president. Chief Justice Earl Warren administered the presidential oath of office to Nixon. Nixon was the first until the inauguration of Joe Biden in 2021, only non-incumbent vice president to be inaugurated as president. It was 35 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy with rain and sleet later in the day. In 1963 was the inauguration of Richard Nixon as president of the United States. It was held, of course, on a Saturday, January 20th, 1973, 48 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., and it was the 47th inauguration and marked the commencement of the second and final four-year term of both Richard Nixon as president and Spiro Agnew as vice president. This made Nixon the first and only person to be inaugurated 4 times as both president and vice president. Chief Justice Warren Burger administered the oath of office to both the president and vice president. It was 42 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy and windy. Then we get on to August 9th, 1974, and the inauguration of President Gerald Ford as the 38th president of the United States. This was 46 years ago in the East Room of the White House in Washington, D.C., after Richard Nixon, the 37th president, resigned to the Watergate scandal. The inauguration was the last non-scheduled inauguration to take place in the 20th century and marked the commencement of Gerald Ford's only term, a partial term of 2 years, 164 days as president. Chief Justice Warren E. Burger administered the oath of office. The Bible upon which Ford recited the oath was held by his wife, Betty Ford. Ford was the 9th vice president of the United States to succeed the presidency interterm, and he remains the most recent to do so. Although this was the 9th non-scheduled inauguration to take place since the presidency was established in 1789, it was the first to take place due to a president's resignation. The previous 8 had been occasioned by the president's death in office. Ford had become vice president only 8 months earlier after Spiro Agnew resigned due to bribery allegations while serving as Baltimore County executive and governor of Maryland. He was the first vice president appointed as such under the terms of the 25th Amendment. Thus, when he succeeded Nixon, Ford became the first and remains the only person to have held both the office of vice president and president without having been elected to either. It was 89 degrees Fahrenheit, partly cloudy skies and hazy. This was the warmest non-traditional inauguration day. Then in 1977, we had Jimmy Carter as the 39th president of the United States. On Thursday, January 20th, 1977, 44 years ago at the East Portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. It was the 48th inauguration and marked the commencement of the only term of both Jimmy Carter as president and Walter Mondale as vice president. Chief Justice Warren E. Burger administered the presidential oath of office to Carter. It was 28 degrees Fahrenheit, cold and sunny. The wind chill temperature was in the teens. Then back in 1981, the first inauguration of Ronald Reagan as the 40th president of the United States. That was on a Tuesday, 40 years ago at the west front of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the first inauguration to be held on the building's west side. And this was the 49th inauguration and marked the commencement of the first term of Ronald Reagan as president and George H.W. Bush as vice president. Chief Justice Warren Burger administered the presidential oath of office to Reagan. It was 55 degrees Fahrenheit, mostly cloudy and mild. It was the warmest January 20th inauguration. We had a high temperature of 56 degrees Fahrenheit for the day. Then in 1985, the second inauguration of Ronald Reagan was held in a small ceremony on Sunday, January 20th, 1985, 36 years ago, at the grand foyer of the White House, and was repeated the following day, January 21st, 1985, at the west front of the United States Capitol Rotunda. This was the 50th inauguration and marked the commencement of both the second and final four-year term of both Ronald Reagan as president and George H.W. Bush as vice president. It was the coldest January inauguration date in overall. So Reagan had the warmest date and the coldest date, back to back. President Ronald Reagan's second swearing-in ceremony on January 20th first had to be held indoors. The parade was canceled. The outside temperature at noon was only 7 degrees Fahrenheit. It was sunny and bitter cold. The morning low was 4 below zero, and the daytime high was only 17 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind chill temperatures during the afternoon were in the minus 10 to minus 20 degree Fahrenheit range. Personally, I think Nancy didn't have the chops to be outside, but that's just my opinion coming from Southern California. Interesting though, he had both the warmest and the coldest. So then in 1989, you had on January 20th, 32 years ago, the inauguration of the 41st president of the United States, George H.W. Bush. And this was at the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. It was the 51st inauguration and marked the commencement of the only term of both George H.W. Bush as president and Dan Quayle as vice president. Chief Justice William Rehnquist administered the presidential oath of office to Bush, and Justice Sandra Day O'Connor administered the vice presidential oath of office to Quayle. Bush was the first sitting vice president to be inaugurated as president since Martin Van Buren in 1837. It was 51 degrees Fahrenheit, mostly cloudy, mild, and breezy. In 1993 was the first inauguration of Bill Clinton as the 42nd president of the United States. 28 years ago at the west front of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. on January 20th. This was the 52nd inauguration and marked the commencement of the first term of Bill Clinton as president and Al Gore as vice president. William Rehnquist, Chief Justice of the United States, administered the oath. It was 40 degrees Fahrenheit at the inauguration, sunny and pleasant. In 1997, there was a second inauguration of Bill Clinton as president of the United States. That was on a Monday, January 20th, 24 years ago at the west front of the United States Capitol building in Washington, D.C. This was the 53rd inauguration and marked the commencement of the second and final term of Bill Clinton as president and Al Gore as vice president. This was the first presidential inauguration to be streamed live on the internet. William Rehnquist, Chief Justice of the United States, administered the oath. We are 34 degrees Fahrenheit, partly sunny with a high overcast. Winds were from the south at 7 miles per hour. Then back in 2001, on January 20th, 20 years ago was the first inauguration of George W. Bush as the 43rd president of the United States at the west front of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the 54th inauguration and marked the commencement of the first term as George W. Bush as president, Dick Cheney as vice president. Chief Justice William Rehnquist administered the presidential oath of office at 12:01 p.m. It was 36 degrees Fahrenheit, a cool, dreary day with rain and fog. The visibility was 2 miles. An inch of rain had fallen the day before, with another third of an inch falling on Inauguration Day. Rain changed to a little light snow, 0.3 of an inch in the late morning. Then in 2005 was the second inauguration of George W. Bush on Thursday, January 20th, 16 years ago. George Bush was inaugurated President of the United States at the west front of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. This was the 55th inauguration and marked the beginning of the second and final term of George W. Bush as president and Dick Cheney's vice president. Chief Justice William Rehnquist administered the presidential oath of office. It was 35 degrees Fahrenheit, mostly cloudy, with some sunny breaks, a northwest wind around 14 miles per hour. Around 1 inch of snow was already on the ground. Back on January 20th, 2009, 12 years ago, Barack Obama had his first inauguration at the United States Capitol as the 44th President of the United States. John Roberts, Chief Justice of the United States, administered the oath. Joe Biden was the 47th President of the United States. As well, it was 28 degrees Fahrenheit, filtered sun through the thin cirrus clouds, breezy with northwest winds around 15 miles an hour, gusting between 20 and 25 miles an hour. Wind chill values were in the mid-teens. And then on Sunday, January 20th, 2013, in the Blue Room of the White House, we had a private swearing-in ceremony of Barack Obama, the second inauguration that was public of Barack Obama as the President of the United States, and the 57th inauguration marked the final term of Barack Obama as president and Joe Biden as vice president. During the public inauguration ceremony 8 years ago at the west front of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., Justice Roberts there is administering the oath. It was 45 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy with a south wind around 7 miles per hour. And just a mere 4 years ago, on January 20th, 2017, we had the inauguration of Donald Trump as the 45th President of the United States, and it marked the only term of Donald Trump as president and Mike Pence as vice president. The Chief Justice John Roberts of the United States administered the oath. It was 48 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy, sprinkles at the swearing-in ceremony, light rain at the start of the parade. South winds were around 5 miles per hour. And then finally, 6 days ago at the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., Joe Biden became the 46th President of the United States. John Roberts administered the oath of office. Kamala Harris was the 49th Vice President of the United States, assumed office. Sonia Sotomayor, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, administered that oath. It was partly cloudy, 42 degrees Fahrenheit with a northwest wind of 20, gusting to 28 miles per hour, producing a wind chill of 33 degrees Fahrenheit. The high for the day was 46 degrees Fahrenheit, and the low of the day was 31 degrees Fahrenheit, with just a trace of rain just before dawn with no snow falling. So now that's me. If you have to get in touch with me, there's my website, my email, and my phone number. I guess I will toss it back to either, I guess Linda, since she introduced me, for any
Actually,
type of
Jack,
question.
I'm gonna jump in and let you
Sure.
catch your breath after that tour de force of Buffalo inaugural weather.
Hey, I've done Zoom calls like 5-6 hours straight,
Oh well.
so I'm used to it.
All right. Well, thank you for that.
You are most welcome. Wondering if there's anybody left.
There's lots of folks, and I'm going to encourage people that if they have questions, please feel free to pop them into either the chat box or the Q&A section. I'm just going to, again, kind of struck by some of the information you threw out there. I'm going to have to, those of you who know me know that I'm a transplant and I do my best with Buffalo, but I didn't realize that Abigail Fillmore had died kind of following the inauguration and the weather issues, which to me kind of, so we had Abigail Fillmore and William Henry Harrison dying following tough inaugural weather, which I thought was interesting. And I wonder, how many lesser known people have had, not expecting you to answer this, Jack, but it occurred to me that perhaps there are some other lesser known folks who have also caught their death of cold from inaugural weather. I loved the William Howard Taft inauguration in 1909, that snow. And I'll just say that as part of our trivia night research, Travis's research, he actually came up that supposedly after that 1909 snowfall that bollocksed up Taft's inauguration, supposedly he also said that, he knew it would be a cold day in hell when he was inaugurated president, which I don't know if you came across that, Jack, or not, but
I didn't come across it.
It seemed somewhat appropriate. So let's see. I don't know if do we have any questions in the Q&A? I don't think so, but again, if people have questions, we are more than happy to share them with Jack. He also, as you saw, shared his contact information.
Did I stop the screen share?
I think perhaps Travis did.
Oh, okay, because I was like, wait, I wasn't sure. Okay.
Yep, we're good. That said, if I don't see any questions, Jack, we really appreciate your research and figuring out all of those. Well, actually, that's a great question. Donald and Susan Sherman want to know if there was ever any hail to the chief during an inauguration.
Not that I found out, but what I would say is hail is produced by thunderstorms, and that time of year, especially in January, is the least time of year you get any type of severe convective weather in that part of the country. So there was never any hail, unfortunately, but it's a pretty good question.
That's a great question.
Yeah. No, just snow and rain and heavy rain. No, there wasn't even any thunderstorms.
I was gonna say, thunder snow, or that's only Buffalo or what?
Well, that's kind of a unique Buffalo type of. They do have it occasionally in other parts of the country, but it's pretty much a Buffalo type of thing.
I'm relieved that, TR's inauguration in Buffalo, that they had good weather and, wasn't the thunder snow.
It was 72 and sunny. I mean, geez.
Yeah.
I mean, Chamber of Commerce weather. Couldn't get any better.
All right. Lynn, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I've got 8 pages of inaugural trivia written down. I just learned so much.
Oh, I didn't know Grover Cleveland was on the $1,000 bill.
Yes.
That I did not know. They put him on in 1928. And it was one of those things where he was the last one on the bill before they got off the gold standard. So
excellent.
It makes it a collector's item, supposedly.
I'm sure. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. So again, thank you, Jack. Thank you, Linda, for sponsoring this. I am going to, however, mention before we leave, I'm going to just mention our next speaker night, and I'm going to try and share my screen if this is going to work. Our next, Travis, thumbs up. Did I get that right? Or chat? Or Linda, are we seeing the right? The,
we had a screen there.
okay, was it the graphic, Linda?
No.
Oh, okay, all right, well, all right. We're gonna skip that. We're gonna skip the graphic because it's laughing at me today.